somewhere in the middle of the Sahara Desert, in a country most people couldn't point to on a map, there's a shape carved into the earth that shouldn't be there. It's not a crater. It's not a canyon. It's a series of perfect concentric rings spread across nearly 30 miles of open desert. So massive and so symmetrical that, for decades, nobody on the ground even knew it existed. You couldn't see it from a car. You couldn't see it from a plane. The only way to understand what you were looking at was to go up, way up. And when astronauts finally did, when the first satellite images came back down to Earth, scientists looked at the pictures and had no idea what they were looking at either. They called it the Richat Structure. Locals in Mauritania had another name for it. They called it the Eye of the Sahara. And once you see the photographs, you understand why. It genuinely looks like something is staring back up at the sky. A pupil, an iris, ring after ring after ring, almost too perfect to be an accident of nature. For years, the official explanation was simple. It was geology, nothing more. A dome of rock that had slowly eroded over millions of years, exposing layer after layer of stone and rings, the same way rings appear when you cut through a tree. Case closed. Except it wasn't closed. Because the more people studied it, the stranger the details became. And somewhere along the way, a question started circulating that most geologists never wanted to touch. What if the Eye of the Sahara wasn't just a rock formation? What if it was something else entirely? What if it was the last visible trace of the most famous lost civilization in human history? To understand why anyone would connect a desert in West Africa to Atlantis, you have to go back more than 2,000 years to a Greek philosopher named Plato. Plato didn't just mention Atlantis in passing. He described it in extraordinary, almost obsessive detail. He wrote about an island kingdom beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a place of immense wealth and advanced engineering, protected by rings. Not one ring, not two, multiple concentric rings of water and land, alternating, circling a central island where the rulers of Atlantis were said to live. Canals connected the rings to each other and to the open sea. Bridges crossed between them. At the very center stood a temple, and beyond that, according to Plato, this civilization eventually angered the gods and vanished beneath the waves in a single, catastrophic day and night. For most of history, that description was treated as exactly what it appeared to be. A story, a moral lesson dressed up as history, written by a philosopher who never claimed to have seen the place himself. But then, people started looking at satellite images of the Richat Structure, and they started noticing something that was very hard to ignore. Concentric rings, multiple of them, spread across a landscape that, according to geological evidence, used to be much closer to water than it is today. That single coincidence might not mean much on its own. Plenty of geological formations have rings, but researchers who went further into the Richat Structure kept finding more details that lined up a little too well with Plato's account. The desert we see today wasn't always a desert. Thousands of years ago, the Sahara was green. It had rivers. It had lakes. Some of those ancient waterways have been traced right through the region where the Richat Structure sits, meaning that at some point in the deep past, this ring-shaped formation could have genuinely been surrounded by water, the same way Plato described Atlantis being surrounded by its rings of sea. Then there's the matter of the rings themselves. Plato was specific about the proportions. He described alternating bands of land and water, arranged with a kind of mathematical precision. Skeptics point out that the rings of the Richat Structure are made of rock, not water and land in the way Plato described. And that's a fair objection. But researchers pushing the Atlantis theory argue that after thousands of years of erosion, of sand burying entire sections, of the climate shifting from wetlands to desert, you wouldn't expect a perfect match. You would expect exactly what we see. A weathered, sand-covered echo of something that might have looked very different when it was still surrounded by water and still, potentially, inhabited. And that raises a bigger question. Could something have actually lived here? Here's where the story gets stranger, because the answer, according to some researchers, might be yes. Not because of Atlantis specifically, but because the Sahara itself holds evidence of a much longer human presence than most people realize. Rock art has been found scattered across the region, showing animals that no longer live anywhere near the Sahara. Giraffes, hippos, crocodiles, elephants. These aren't the animals of a desert. These are the animals of a wetland, a place with rivers deep enough for hippos and open plains, lush enough for giraffes to graze. The Sahara used to support exactly that kind of ecosystem, and the people who lived there left behind paintings proving it. Which means a large advanced settlement in this region isn't as far-fetched as it might sound at first. The conditions existed. The water existed. The question is only whether a civilization sophisticated enough to build ringed canals and central temples existed alongside it. Mainstream archaeology says no. There's no confirmed structure inside the Richat Formation that resembles a temple, a canal system, or a city foundation. What we have instead is a purely natural explanation. And it's worth actually laying it out, because it's genuinely fascinating on its own. The leading scientific theory is that the Richat structure formed when a dome of molten rock pushed up from deep within the earth, roughly 100 million years ago, but never actually broke through the surface as a volcano. Instead, it created a massive bulge, layer upon layer of rock forced upward, and then, over an unimaginable span of time, worn down by wind and water until the different rock layers were exposed in rings, like the growth rings of an ancient tree, sliced open and laid flat across the desert floor. It's an elegant explanation. It's also, notably, one that doesn't fully satisfy everyone who has studied the site closely, because the erosion pattern at Richat is unusually symmetrical for a naturally formed dome. Most eroded domes don't erode this evenly. Most don't produce rings this clean, this concentric, across an area this large. That doesn't prove anything supernatural happened here. But it's exactly the kind of anomaly that keeps a theory like the Atlantis connection alive, instead of dying out, the way most fringe ideas eventually do. There's another detail that keeps getting brought up by people chasing this theory, and it has to do with distance. Plato didn't just describe rings. He described Atlantis as being located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which most historians interpret as the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow gap of water separating Europe from Africa. If you draw a fairly direct line from Gibraltar, heading south and slightly west along the old coastline of ancient wetter Africa, you eventually arrive somewhere in the general region of modern Mauritania. It's not an exact match to any specific coordinate Plato gave, because honestly, Plato never gave exact coordinates. But it's close enough, geographically, that some researchers argue Richat sits comfortably within the range of what Plato might have been describing, especially once you account for how dramatically the coastline and climate of North Africa have shifted since ancient times. Critics have a response to almost every piece of this theory, and it's worth hearing them out too, because the skepticism isn't unreasonable. Most historians believe Atlantis was never a real place at all, that Plato invented it entirely as a philosophical device, a fictional society used to illustrate ideas about pride, ambition, and the fall of great civilizations. Under that reading, looking for Atlantis anywhere on Earth, whether in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, or the Sahara, is a bit like searching for the physical location of a parable. The story was never meant to be found, because it was never meant to be real. And yet, the Richat structure keeps pulling people back in, and it's not hard to understand why. It looks like almost nothing else on the planet. It's genuinely one of the only formations visible from space that immediately resembles rings within rings, a detail that feels less like coincidence and more like a signature. Astronauts have used it as a landmark for decades, precisely because nothing else nearby looks remotely like it. And in a mystery built entirely on ancient, secondhand descriptions, having even one real, physical, photographable place that matches the shape described by Plato is enough to keep the theory alive year after year, even without a single confirmed artifact. Some researchers have gone further, suggesting that any evidence of an advanced civilization at Richat wouldn't necessarily still be visible from the surface at all. If people did live there thousands of years ago, During the era when the Sahara was still green, any structures they built could easily be buried now under centuries of sand, wind erosion, and shifting dunes. The same way entire cities in Egypt and Mesopotamia remained hidden for thousands of years, until someone finally decided to dig in the right spot. Nobody has conducted a full-scale archaeological excavation of the Richat Structure looking specifically for signs of ancient settlement. Most of what we know comes from geological surveys, not archaeological ones, and that distinction matters. Geologists are looking at rock. They're not necessarily looking for pottery, foundations, or tool marks buried beneath the surface. That gap, the fact that nobody has really gone looking, is exactly the kind of space where theories like this one thrive. It's not that anyone has proven a lost civilization built the eye of the Sahara. It's that nobody has definitively proven they didn't. At least, not through the kind of dedicated excavation that would settle the question once and for all. So, where does that leave us? A massive, symmetrical, ring-shaped formation, sitting in a desert that used to be a wetland, matching several key details from a story that's been told for over 2,000 years, but lacking the one piece of hard evidence that would turn theory into fact. No temple has been uncovered, no canal walls, no central island with the ruins of a palace. Just rock, sand, and rings, stretching out across nearly 30 miles of Mauritanian desert. Visible clearly only from a height no ancient civilization could have reached on its own. Maybe that's exactly what you'd expect from a purely geological formation, worn down over 100 million years by nothing more than wind, water, and time. Or maybe, buried somewhere beneath those layers of stone and sand, there's something nobody has looked hard enough to find yet. Until someone actually puts a shovel in the ground at the right coordinates, the eye of the Sahara gets to keep staring back at us, rings within rings, refusing to fully explain itself either way.